All right, guys, in our unit, the rise of the West, now we actually get to the point where, with the advantages taken by the West in the various democratic revolutions and new states that are formed as a result, and of course the Industrial Revolution, we finally get to the point where the countries of the West will come to dominate the globe. But before we do so, a little review on the Industrial Revolution. You're going to go ahead and open the Google document. It's a PDF that looks something like this here. It says Progress of the Century, and there's a little bit of background and a few questions to go along with it. Now, these questions are a little bit different in that here's a document. You're asked to not provide an argument for the prompt. That's actually going to be provided for you in the space that is provided right here. So the prompt is laid out. The thesis is laid out as well. But what you're going to do with the document is to actually use the document as evidence for this particular thesis statement, and then more importantly for our exercise here, to be able to source the document, explaining either the occasion, the author, or the purpose for this particular document. Okay. So take a little bit of time just to review the Industrial Revolution and examine the progress of the century by Currier and Ives. So pause the video right now, and we'll come back in just a moment. All right, guys, we're back. Hopefully you're able to see this document as a really positive and maybe overly positive viewpoint of the Industrial Revolution. And hopefully you're, from the source here, you're able to garner some kind of point of view statement. But in a lot of ways, the Industrial Revolution isn't just simply about communications and transportation, but it's going to allow the West to do a number of things that it was already in a lot of ways in the process of doing, but in a much, much more effective and much more powerful ways. In that the Industrial Revolution is going to lead to items like this here, the machine gun, the Maxim gun, steel battleships, and ocean line cruisers, right? The connection across the globe. And you check out this image here, the number of artillery shells that you see that can be mass produced and manufactured. All of this being able to transport from point A to point B to any part of the globe by steamship and by rail, which we're going to get to later on. The Industrial Revolution is going to lead to what we call the new imperialism, the conquest by Western states of the rest of the globe. So we're going to take a look at this by answering a few questions. I'll run through this as quickly as I can in addressing these particular questions: who, what, when, why, how, and particularly examples of the new imperialism, the resistance, and some consequences as well. As noted before, it is the Western world, that the industrialized Western world, particularly Britain, France, Germany, and the United States amongst some of the major powers, but it's also going to allow for smaller countries, even ones like the Netherlands, Belgium, and others. You would expect to have global empires will actually succeed in doing so. Now, imperialism itself is not new by any means. It's just that how extensive it can be done is going to change here. So in our previous time period, after the post-Columbian era, we have Europeans creating colonies all across the world, the creation of the American colonies in North and South America by Britain, Spain, France, and others. But they're limited in scope because of technology. Many of the ones in the Indian Ocean happen to be seaports, and they're not going too far inland as well. You can imagine that would probably be the case in the Americas, except for one of the world's worst pandemics, the smallpox disease ravaging the Native American population. Otherwise, that might be different as well. And the big change is with the Industrial Revolution is that the technology that comes about is going to allow for governments to implement direct control across the world. Check out this map of Africa, where we have dozens of different tribal groups, smaller kingdoms that are dotting across sub-Saharan Africa. And so the only incursions that we see in Africa were actually by the Ottomans, which turns out to be, again, one of the strongest empires of the world at this particular time here. Eventually, we have the coastal colonies that are established by European states. And with the Industrial Revolution, they are now capable of going further inland, enough so such that they can create almost this imperial game of sorts, whereby they're working amongst themselves, like a board game, right? Where they're just simply taking over land from native peoples, and there's not too much that native peoples can do about it. They will do stuff. We'll get to that as a part of this lecture. Okay? And so as a result of this control here, by the 20th century, Africa is almost completely controlled by Western European states. Okay? They're going to have a different effect and different outcomes in the empires of East and South Asia, but again, will also be influential in creating empire. And in Latin America, whereby there is some distance, but then also further past influences by European states, the types of interventions will be economic, particularly, and we'll get to some instances of that later on. And in other places, like Oceania and Australia, we have conquest of the natives, like we have with the United States moving further west as well. Now, the issue with empire building is that it is costly. Why would they not only pay the financial cost, but in some cases the human cost as well for creating empire, which is what imperialism is. First of all, industrialization brings the need to try to get natural resources. Now, there's the material that we know for sure, right? Things that are worth something, right? Gold, diamonds, and industrial revolution, things like coal. Okay? But think about with the second phase of the industrial revolution, whereby all of a sudden we're developing all of these and discovering uses for all of the other stuff in the periodic table as well. Where do you find those? Oftentimes it's going to be in other states, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa as well. And not only that, but when European states looked at places like India and China, they saw for themselves an immense population that is there to buy all the goods that they're producing. So in other words, they're there to try to create and generate new markets to sell to as well. So it's not just simply gathering resources, it's creating them and then sending them overseas as a means to sell the goods for profit. Not only that, but nationalism plays an enormous picture as well, because empire becomes the measure of national greatness. One German historian puts it this way: all great nations in their fullness of strength have the desire to set their mark upon barbarian lands. Those who fail to participate in this great rivalry will play a pitiable role to come, right? So in this case, they aren't anything. Okay. There are a few social justifications as well, and it starts off with some real genuineness. Okay. The Christian missionaries who moved into sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, decided to take the fight against slavery directly to the slave sellers themselves in the African continent, and in the process will bring about Christianity, which has its benefits, but also major costs as well for the native tribes because of the push of westernization by these particular groups. While there is some loss of religion and control, Westerners will bring Western-style education systems, Western medicine, and an end to somewhat many will deem as inhumane policies, like the policy of sati, which is in other words for widow burning, where a wife will have to join her dead husband in a funeral pyre and basically burn herself to death. Okay? So there is some altruism, some purported good that is brought about by Westerners as they entered into the other parts of the globe. There are more, unfortunately, some nastier deals. Now, from your study of biology, you probably know what Darwinism is, right? The survival of the fittest as a means of not just surviving, but over time and over generations, that new species will be better adapted to the circumstances and the environment around them. Now, unfortunately, you have individuals like Herbert Spencer right here, who you see in the top right-hand corner, who are going to take the theories of survival of the fittest and decide that, well, it's something else, and that it could be somehow applied not to the human race, but to human races. Okay, so in other words, some ethnic and racial identities are quote unquote, and you see my quotes hopefully, superior to others. Now, please again take these images with the full notion of our understanding here in the 20th and 21st centuries. Hey, this is some awful stuff that they're coming up with under the guise and the background that this is science. Today we call this pseudoscience. Okay? And so with this pseudoscience, they're going to create this notion of the superiority of the white race. Okay? That basically everybody else is a pre-evolved version of the English or the German or so forth here. Okay? Now, this becomes in a lot of ways a marginalized belief. So don't think everybody believes in this. That's not the case by any means here, but it hangs around for a while. And eventually others are going to take this on in the 20th century with some dire consequences. Now, not that people are this racist, but there's at least a hint of racism through what we can call white paternalism. Again, if paternalism means some sort of father figure, there's this notion that the British and the Germans and the Americans are bringing quote unquote civilization to the savages and so forth. And so therefore they would have to take care of the masses that they discover across the world here. Rudyard Kipling, in a lot of ways, one of the famed poets of the imperial age in the 19th century, wrote this famous poem. This is the first stanza, by the way. It's probably the most bearable stanza. It gets worse from here, but it shows white paternalism in a way that I think few words can. So take this notion here, the white man's burden. A burden is a weight on your shoulder, right? Take up the white man's burden. Send forth the best ye breed. Send your sons to exile, because it's not Europe, right? To serve your captives' needs. To wait in heavy harness, unfluttered folk and wild. Your new caught, like their animals, right? Sullen peoples, let me come right back here. Half devil. Now, if you are a devil, right, you are evil, right? But yet at the exact same time, they are half child, right? They can't help it. They're evil. Yes, they can't help it. And so therefore they need the white man, the European races. And so therefore it is the duty of the English and the Americans and the Germans and the French to take up this burden of, we have to civilize these wretched, wretched people. Okay? And so there's some justification here for why they might conquer other territories. Okay? So with that, you're going to go ahead and take a look at a document. Okay? And that particular document is in the same one that we opened up previously. It is called the British Contract with an African King. So take a look at this. But before we do so, based on the lecture material that we've just gone through here, go ahead and write a context statement or two that will respond to the prompt that you see right here. How did Africans respond to European imperialism? So that's the prompt here. And here's the thesis statement that's laid out here. So this is about imperialism. This is about European conquest and the responses made by those in sub-Saharan Africa who have been conquered. So based on what we've discussed so far, write a 1 to 2 sentence context statement that sort of describes the overall notion of the rise of the West and things that we've discussed so far. So go ahead and pause the video right now. All right, guys, you're back. Hopefully you've come up with some items here from the lecture. So just a reminder of where we are. We are in that part where we're explaining the why imperialism, and we're going to take a look at now the how so in just a bit. One thing seems to be obvious, and that is from the Industrial Revolution, the military technology of the West is much more advanced. But it's not just about having guns or having better guns by any means here. And yes, they did, right? Items like the repeating rifle, right? The Maxim gun, the predecessor to our modern machine guns as such. Rifles with long range, highly accurate, and artillery pieces, where they can go ahead and shoot at long distances with high explosives and others, right? But not only that, but it's also well tested as well. Europeans fight a lot of wars against one another. And so as a result, they are just simply better trained in doing so. They also have more weapons. They're better supplied. The Industrial Revolution means that they can continue to supply their troops no matter how far away they are, with an ample amount of material, shipping them across the seas, and when they've created their railroads, be able to further move inland as quick as they possibly can. Not only that, but there is a sense of discipline, right? The professional soldiers that are now in European armies. Again, with the Napoleonic Age comes both conscription, but then also the creation of military schools. The one in the United States, the most famous one, is West Point, among several. But you now have schools that will train officers to be able to fight in different wars, to look at strategies and so forth here. So much so that it's going to lead to, and one of the foremost and examples of Western imperialism and the weight of the Industrial Revolution actually comes in the Battle of Omdurman. If you watch the film that we're going to see later on, you can see a good example of this as well. But Omdurman, right at the turn of the century, pitted about 40,000 Sudanese soldiers with older muskets and spears against our army about half their size here, of British and Egyptian allies armed with the latest and greatest gunboats, artillery, machine gun, breech-loading, repeating rifles, and the such. And the battle result was as lopsided as you can possibly get. 104 Sudanese soldiers dead, about 10,000 were wounded, and all at the cost of about 48 British soldiers dead. That's it. That is the Industrial Revolution, in terms of empire building in a nutshell. Furthermore, there were also communication and transportation advances as well that we had previously mentioned. Railroads and steamships moved material deep into the wilderness like never before, deep into the jungles where previously they never had access. The telegraph lines allow for the metropoles, the center of these empires in London, in Washington, D.C., Paris, Rome, and others, to be able to connect with their empires across the world. And just to give you an idea of how vast the Industrial Revolution is compared to the past here, these are telegraph lines that are laid out right at the turn of the century. And yes, if you're looking at this correctly, they're underwater as well. I mean, just try to imagine that. Just the scope of this world. It shows how small we are, but yet at the exact same time, how advanced these societies are compared to the past. Now, one thing that the Europeans could never contest in was dealing with tropical diseases, smallpox, malaria particularly. But some of the revolutions made in science and medicine in this era is going to change that. Well, example of this is quinine, which is a drug from an American tree bark, by the way, which has been used to try to combat malaria. And then there's also the process of inoculation, again, giving a form of the disease to be able for your body to create the antibodies necessary to be able to fight it later on. I think we are at this point well versed in stuff like this as well. So combating these particular diseases. And then when it comes to places like Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, what Europeans have done is they find local allies in various local regions, and what they'll do is they will divide and conquer. They will look in many cases to various existing kingdoms or tribes that might help them out. It gives them a number of concessions, and with these allies, they're able to conquer deep inland, like what the British East India Company did in Bengal, what the Dutch did in Java to create their Indonesian empire as well. And so as a result, with these particular purposes, we can see how the West is able to conquer these particular places. So with that in mind, that should give you enough information to examine this document here, the contract with an African king. So go ahead and at this point, pause the video and go ahead and answer number 4, 5, and 6. So again, pause the video, go ahead and read this particular document, which is again on this second part here. Answer the document. Check out, this is Lobengula, the king we're talking about, and go ahead and answer 4, 5, and 6. So go ahead and pause the video right now. Okay, we're back. Hopefully you've done 4, 5, and 6. If you had trouble with any of this here, let me go ahead and provide a clue for you in this particular document. An important part of understanding this document is sometimes when you get documents like this, there's always a line or two that creates the real key point. So the one I want to highlight for you is right here. In terms of understanding this document, this might be will really help you. In this case, it's towards the end of the document, where Lo Bengula does this. He gives the complete and exclusive charge over all metals and minerals situated and contained in my kingdoms, principalities, dominions, together with full power to do all things that they deem, and here's the key part, necessary to win and procure the same. Let me underline this part once again here. They give, again, full power to do all things that they deem necessary to win and procure the same. The African king has given this up. So if you struggled with examining this document, look at this clue right now, and hopefully you're able to answer this particular part. But again, another means by which Africans had their land taken away from them. And that is one of the examples of the new imperialism, whereby with all of these advantages, the European powers are able to come together, realizing, look, the natives will not resist that well. And so they were able to come together in outside of Britain, that is, through what is known as the Berlin Conference, and divide up Africa based on, so that they're not fighting against one another over these particular colonies. It's actually led by the Belgian king, who you'll see later on, King Leopold, in trying to secure the Belgian Congo for himself. But this is an instance of sort of that game where the Europeans just simply says, these are now our lands, we're just going to divide it up amongst ourselves here using the advantages that they hold. Now, what about states that had actually already been in existence? And so examples like in Latin America, where you have independent Mexico and others and so forth here. And so while there were some military interventions, a lot of the interventions were done by a support of economic institutions, like, for example, the plantation system. Those guys who've been to Hawaii, a place that you've probably been to is the Dole fruit plantation. And like we see in Hawaii and all across Latin America, there are all these cash crop plantations whereby the owners were actually Americans, British, French, and so forth, using localized labor. And what these groups will do is they will go ahead and try to influence the government, by whether it's by bribery or by just simply the influence of bringing in all these resources and so forth. They're going to try to influence the politics as supported by their home states to prop up whatever government, whether democratic or particularly non-democratic, is such that they will continue to have these plantations and still reap the profits thereof. A great example of this is the Panama Canal, whereby this potentially highly strategic location was actually a part of Colombia. And what the United States does is, in order to secure the land to create the canal, they actually nudged on a Panamanian independence movement. When the Panamanians declared independence, lo and behold, there were American gunships waiting along the shoreline. And when Panama was declared independent, one of the first deals that they made was with the United States to give them the canal zone to build the canal. Now, the building canal is another story here. It is a massive industrial feat. But it is, it's pretty incredible. So I may link you to a video on that at another time. So with that, there is exploitation economically in places like Latin America, which is going to bring the benefit of integrating Latin America into the global economy, but particularly through the sale of cash crop items or natural resources. Not only that, but a lot of the local specialists, whereas steel, iron making was important in sub-Saharan Africa, cloth making was important in India. Many of these groups are going to find themselves out of a job because they get undersold by the industrial products of the Western world. So a decline in local specialists, whereby many of these states are really still today, their economies are reliant upon the export of single export raw material items. Okay, not only that, but because now you have these connecting forces across the globe, okay, through Western finance and capital and corporations and steamships and so forth, the world is much more connected than ever before. And so you have laborers, okay, who are seeking jobs that will now cross oceans to be able to find them as well. So whether, and we're gonna, is the Indians in South Africa, whether it's the Chinese in the Americas, that would be instances of the travel of the global wage laborer. Okay, but frequently, one of the costs of European conquest is the forced labor system, and not necessarily slavery, but corvée labor, okay? Labor as a tax, okay, that are utilized by Western states, okay, as such. Okay, so with that, okay, we're going to take a look at, and this should be the last question here regarding evidence beyond the document. So the last few things we're going to examine in this lecture, you can go ahead and actually view in it's question 7 here, evidence beyond the document here. So where do we find evidence beyond the document for a prompt like this here? We'll get to it in this last part of the lecture. Okay. So with that, let's examine some evidence of resistance to imperialism. Okay. So frequently, because African groups were forced to grow cash crops and therefore abandoning traditional villages and traditional labor practices, agricultural practices, many will resist. Okay, and they're going to resist violently. So for instance, one of the most famous is the Maji Maji uprising in German East Africa, whereby there were a number of tribesmen who rebelled against their Germans, led by medicine men and shaman, who sprinkled this holy water, this magic water on their soldiers, such that with the belief that this water will make them impervious to bullets. You can imagine it didn't quite work out, but worst of all was the retaliations by German forces on the soldiers and their families when the rebellion actually failed. There were some successes. Samori Toure fought against the French in West Africa to try to create his own empire, and he resisted for the better part of a decade and a half by diplomacy and particularly by fighting the French. And then when it comes to successes, there's no one better than Menelik II of Ethiopia, and how he was able to defeat invading Italians in the Battle of Adwa in 1896 and secure independence of Ethiopia, at least for another almost half century. There are also further examples of what we call passive religious resistance. Okay. One strange occurrence is what is known as the Xhosa cattle killing movement, whereby there was a vision that was given to 2 girls that was eventually reported back to their villagers, whereby many of these conquered people believed that at some point that a great resurrection was going to take place. In other words, people will die and then you'll be brought back to life, and this lifetime of struggle against these Western conquerors will just simply come to an end. And so what these herdsmen did was they killed their means of living. 20,000 plus cattle were slaughtered, leaving about 100,000 people dying of, unfortunately, starvation before colonial authorities actually came to try to stop this. But this was a type of resistance in a different way, in a spiritual manner as well. There are others, including what is known as the ghost dance of the conquered Native Americans in what becomes known as the United States, whereby you have this movement where bringing together some Protestant ideas, some Native American beliefs as well, all to the hope that they would revitalize some traditional culture and find a way to deal with the poverty, hunger, and disease of being put onto reservations. American soldiers unfortunately feared that this was an uprising about to happen and eventually shot dozens of Native Americans in what becomes known as the Massacre of Wounded Knee. But it wasn't always all failure. In some cases, European colonization brought different tribes to join up together into actual political entities. An example of this is the Zulu nation that was formed in the southern part of Africa, the Cherokee Nation, bringing together a number of tribes together into a confederation, the Delaware, the Natchez, the Shawnee, the Chippewa, and the Cherokee would be brought together into a single confederation to fight against American incursions into Native American lands. Then there are those who decided maybe the best way is to just simply emulate what's going on. And so we see that example in the Meiji Restoration in Japan, whereby Japan, with the victory of the pro-industrialized, the pro-modernized groups in Japan, they were made the decision to modernize as quickly as possible. And we see this in sub-Saharan Africa, in Ethiopia, in Menelik and his adaptation of Western technologies, military equipment, styles of diplomacy, and the type of diplomacy that's utilized in Siam as well. And again, we'll take a look at these two particular instances in greater detail later on. So with that, there are some legacies and really some questions to think about. The official Olympic languages, for instance, there's usually three. One is the home country where the Olympics is taking place. The other two may actually surprise you. It's not Chinese, it's not Spanish. They're English and French. And again, legacies of the imperial past. The most popular sport in the world is football, which is a sport across the world. You Americans might call it soccer. Most popular form of government today is some form of democracy in one way or another. So there are a number of consequences to imperialism. The most straightforward of all is the loss of political autonomy. In other words, you don't control your own lands anymore. The spread of diseases all across the globe, exploitation of natural resource. What do you do when you go on safari? Look at animals? No, the whole point is you kill, you slaughter for the sake of sport. Christianity becomes the most prevalent religion in the world. And not only that, but some of the roots of modern day conflicts. Western imperialism will create boundaries and borders that never existed before. It may not even be natural. They're going to lead to modern day wars in Vietnam, in the Middle East. And if you have watched the movie Hotel Rwanda, this is an example of a case of European colonialism gone wrong. And lastly, there are a few others. The last two, colonial legacies and the rise of the eventual West. And there are a few major legacies in that when it comes to education and modern education, is the Western standard, how things are done, that is utilized across the globe. Western styles of law. We talk about language, with English and French being the lingua franca of the world. The Mandarin Chinese will probably come after in the 21st century. I can show a picture like this here and ask you, hey, what city is this? And you could probably answer with a dozen different cities, all on different countries and continents. Again, we talk about sport in terms of the most popular sports in the world, whether it be cricket or football, for instance. And as a result, the institutions that define the entire globe, they all tend to be Western. Western capitalism, democracy, Western culture, Western art. These are all considered to be the predominant parts of almost each of these particular categories, leading to sort of the world that we live in today. So we're going to look at some consequences, some means of resistance from other states, particularly the empires, as well as we continue. But by the 20th century, it is the industrial West that controls the globe, with some dire consequences to come in the 20th century. All right, guys, thanks for your attention, and I'll catch you next time.